Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own life? Like you were able to see things that others completely ignore? That sensation of carrying an invisible weight, of noticing lies that no one else catches, of feeling others' pain as if it were your own? If you recognize yourself in these questions, you probably know the deepest loneliness that exists. The loneliness of someone who possesses extreme sensitivity. It's not just being physically alone. It's the loneliness of a consciousness that sees too much, feels too much, understands too much. This journey will reveal why some of us carry this unique burden, and why, paradoxically, this loneliness can be both our greatest weakness and our most powerful strength. But first, let's understand what it really means to be an empath in the deepest sense. We're not just talking about someone who cares about others. That would be common empathy. We're talking about the genuine empath. People who absorb others' emotions like sponges, who pick up micro-expressions invisible to others, who feel the emotional energy of environments and people involuntarily and constantly. The empath functions like a human antenna, processing emotional information all the time, unable to turn off this heightened perception. There's a brutal difference between being alone and being lonely by nature. The empath doesn't choose solitude, it chooses them. From childhood, they realize they see the world through different lenses. While others play carefree, they notice when someone is sad even while smiling. When the family argues, they feel each emotional wound as if they were being cut from the inside. At school, this difference becomes clearer. Others laugh at cruel jokes, but the empath feels the victim's pain. They try to defend, try to explain, but nobody understands why they complicate things so much. Classmates see them as strange, too sensitive, dramatic, and thus the first layer of their loneliness is born: misunderstanding. Over the years, this feeling of not belonging intensifies. The empath realizes their friendships are different. While others are content with superficial conversations about weather or celebrities, they long for deep connections. They want to talk about fears, dreams, about what really matters. But these conversations scare people. They prefer to stay on the surface, where it's safe and comfortable. The family, which should be the refuge, often becomes another battlefield. The empath feels the unspoken tensions, the harbored resentments, the masks everyone wears. They try to be the mediator, the healer, the one who brings peace. But nobody asks to be saved. Nobody wants their wounds exposed to light. And the empath learns their first bitter lesson. Not everyone wants to be understood. This heightened perception that makes them special also condemns them to isolation. It's like having a superpower that nobody recognizes, that nobody values, that actually bothers more than it helps. And so, from very early on, the empath learns that their sensitivity is both a gift and a curse. The burden becomes heavier when the empath discovers they not only feel their own emotions intensely, but also absorb others' emotions like a sponge. They walk through a mall and feel strangers' anxiety. They watch the news and carry victims' pain for days. They talk with a depressed friend and leave the conversation exhausted, as if they had run an emotional marathon. But the real weight comes from seeing what others refuse to see. The empath notices when someone lies, even if the lie is well constructed. They notice when there are hidden intentions behind apparent kindnesses. They see through the social masks everyone wears so carefully. And this becomes an unbearable burden, because it means living in a world where almost nothing is what it appears to be. Imagine knowing that your boss praises you to your face, but criticizes you behind your back. Realizing that a close friend envies your success, even if they never admit it. Feeling that someone is lying about their feelings, pretending to be okay when they're actually falling apart inside. This constant awareness of subtexts, of hidden intentions, of unspoken truths, is like carrying an invisible weight that can never be put down. Someone with this nature becomes hypervigilant, always scanning the emotional environment around them. This is exhausting. While others can relax in social situations, the empath is constantly processing emotional information. They feel when there's tension between a couple, pretending to be happy. They notice when someone is afraid, even if they try to appear confident. They notice when there's sadness behind a forced smile. And worst of all, the empath cares. They can't simply ignore these perceptions and move on. Each person's pain becomes their pain. Each perceived falsehood becomes their moral burden. Each hidden truth becomes their heavy secret. It's like having emotional X-ray vision in a world where everyone prefers to keep their skeletons well guarded in the closet. This constant sensory and emotional overload explains why people like this often feel exhausted even without having done anything physically tiring. They process emotional information all the time, involuntarily. It's like trying to sleep with loud music, impossible to truly relax. Here arises a crucial distinction that few understand. Common empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes occasionally, when necessary. It's a valuable social skill, but controllable. The genuine empath lives in a different state. They don't turn their sensitivity on and off. It's always active, always picking up, always processing. Carl Jung spoke about the collective unconscious, this deep layer of the human psyche where we share universal fears, desires, and patterns. The empath seems to have more direct access to this dimension. They function like a human antenna, picking up emotional frequencies that most people automatically filter out. This explains why they know things about people that even they themselves don't consciously know. But this connection to the collective unconscious comes at a high price. The empath absorbs not only individual emotions, but also humanity's collective pains. They feel urban loneliness, generalized anxiety, the existential fear that permeates our era. It's like trying to carry the world's suffering on their shoulders. Hypersensitivity isn't limited to human emotions. They're affected by environments, energies, even by objects that carry emotional memories. A house where there were constant fights feels heavy to them. A place where someone suffered greatly preserves that impression. They enter some places and immediately feel uncomfortable, without knowing exactly why. This extreme sensory openness means they need to be very careful about the environments they frequent, and the people they spend time with. They absorb influences like paper absorbs ink. If they spend time with negative people, they become negative. If they stay in toxic environments, they become emotionally ill. Their emotional permeability is both their greatest strength and their greatest vulnerability. The psychological impact of constantly carrying emotions that aren't theirs can be devastating. They often can't distinguish between their own feelings and those they've absorbed from others. They wake up sad for no reason, then discover their neighbor is going through a divorce. They feel inexplicable anxiety, only to later discover they picked up a coworker's nervousness. This constant emotional confusion can lead to serious identity problems. They start questioning their own feelings, their own reactions. They ask themselves, is this really mine, or am I absorbing it from someone? This constant doubt about the authenticity of their own emotions is a unique form of psychological suffering. The inevitable result of this sensory overload is a deep and specific loneliness. It's not the loneliness of someone who has no one nearby. It's the loneliness of someone who sees and feels things that others can't see or feel. It's like speaking a language that no one else understands, having experiences they can't share with anyone. The empath looks around and sees people living in a kind of emotional unconsciousness they secretly envy. They can ignore tensions, pretend they don't notice lies, move forward without carrying the emotional weight of the world. For someone with this sensitivity, this ability to turn off seems like an unattainable superpower. At parties, while others genuinely have fun, they feel all the insecurities, silent competitions, and social masks present in the environment. They see couples fighting through forced smiles, feel envy disguised as compliments, notice loneliness behind apparent sociability. It's impossible to relax when you're constantly aware of what's really happening beneath the surface. Romantic relationships become especially complex. They can't settle for superficial connections. They need depth, authenticity, emotional truth. But most people aren't prepared for this level of psychological intimacy. They feel exposed, vulnerable, even invaded by the ability to see through their defenses. Friendships also suffer. They offer deep understanding, but this can be frightening. People feel like they're under constant emotional X-ray. They start censoring themselves, being careful about what they say or do in this person's presence. Paradoxically, those who most desire genuine connection end up creating distance involuntarily. They learn early that their heightened perception is seen as a social defect, not as a gift. They're called too intense, complicated, dramatic. People tell them they think too much, that they should relax more. But for those who live this way, this hypersensitivity isn't a choice, it's their fundamental nature. this constant misunderstanding creates layers of loneliness. First, the loneliness of not being understood. Then, the loneliness of not being able to connect authentically. And finally, the deepest loneliness of all. Questioning if there's something wrong with them, if they're the problem, if they should try to be different from what they are. Often they try to adapt. They build masks, pretend to be less sensitive, try to ignore their perceptions. But this is like trying to stop breathing. It can work for a while, but eventually nature prevails. And when this happens, loneliness becomes even more intense. Because now they're alienated not only from others, but also from themselves. The most destructive combination in human dynamics happens when the empath meets the narcissist. It's like an emotional magnet. The empath is attracted by the opportunity to heal and understand, while the narcissist is attracted by someone they can drain without apparent consequences. This dynamic creates one of the most painful types of loneliness. Loneliness within a relationship. The empath sees the narcissist and perceives the deep wound behind the grandiose mask. They feel compassion for the wounded child that exists within the manipulative adult. And this traps them in a cycle of healing attempts that never work. They believe that if they just love enough, understand enough, give enough, they'll be able to heal that person. But the narcissist doesn't want to be healed. They want to be supplied. They see sensitivity as an infinite source of emotional energy. Every time they try to connect deeply, the narcissist absorbs this energy without reciprocating. It's like trying to fill a leaky bucket. No matter how much you put in, it will never be enough. They give themselves completely in these relationships. They justify the narcissist's behaviors, go to therapy, to understand better, read books about how to love someone difficult. They believe the key is being more understanding, more patient, more loving. But in reality, they're feeding a system that systematically exhausts them. The cycle is predictable and devastating. The narcissist creates emotional crises that only they can solve. They alternate between moments of intense intimacy and cruel rejection. They become addicted to this emotional roller coaster, always waiting for the next moment of genuine connection that will justify all the suffering. When the relationship inevitably ends, they're left with a loneliness different from anything they've ever experienced. It's not just the pain of losing someone, it's the pain of discovering that their greatest strength, the ability to love unconditionally, was used against them. They feel deceived, used, discarded like something worthless. But worst is the confusion that remains. They question their own perception. How did someone so sensitive not realize they were being manipulated? The answer is cruel in its simplicity. They did notice, but interpreted manipulation as pain that needed to be healed, not as abuse that needed to be avoided. This experience leaves them even more isolated. They develop a deep distrust of their own intuition, which was previously their greatest strength. If they can be so completely deceived by someone who seemed to need their help, how can they trust their perceptions about any other person? Loneliness after a relationship with a narcissist is especially bitter because they feel complicit in their own abuse. They know they saw the red flags, but chose to interpret them as cries for help. Their compassion, which should be a virtue, became their trap. The empath carries their goodness like others carry talents or disabilities. It's a fundamental characteristic of their nature. But unlike other personality traits, the empath's goodness operates in a world that frequently punishes kindness and rewards cruelty. It's like being vegetarian in a world of carnivores. Technically possible, but constantly challenging. Their goodness isn't a conscious choice or moral stance. It's an automatic response to others' suffering. When they see someone in pain, they don't decide to help. They simply need to help, the same way they need to breathe. This compulsion to heal and comfort others is both their blessing and their curse. The problem arises when this goodness meets people who don't have good intentions. They project their own nature onto others, assuming that, deep down, everyone wants to connect, love, and be genuinely loved. This projection makes them vulnerable to people who see their goodness not as a gift, but as a weakness to be exploited. They become the friend who always lends money and never gets it back, the colleague who stays late helping others with their projects while their own fall behind, the partner who forgives repeated betrayals because they understand the reasons behind them. Their goodness transforms into an open door for abuse. But perhaps the most painful aspect of this goodness is how it's often misinterpreted. When they offer genuine help, Others assume they have hidden motives. When they show real concern, they're seen as manipulative or clingy. Their authenticity is constantly questioned in a cynical world that has learned to distrust kindness. They discover that their goodness makes them strange in others' eyes. They're too generous, too attentive, too concerned. People feel uncomfortable with their authenticity because it exposes the artificiality of their own social interactions. It's like turning on a bright light in a room where everyone preferred the twilight. Over time, they start questioning whether their goodness is worth it. They see less kind people prospering, getting promoted, having apparently easier relationships. They wonder if they shouldn't harden their heart, be more calculating, protect themselves more. But trying to suppress their goodness is like trying to suppress their personality. Temporarily possible, but devastating long-term. The final tragedy of this goodness is that it often remains unrecognized. Their kind actions are seen as expected, not special. They become the person everyone seeks when they need help, but few think to help when they need it. Their constant goodness makes them invisible, an always available resource, but rarely valued. This lack of recognition creates a unique loneliness. They feel used, taken for granted, valued only when useful. They realize they're loved for what they do, not for who they are. And this realization corrodes their self-esteem and deepens their sense of isolation. When misunderstanding and exhaustion accumulate over years, something inside can break silently. It's not a dramatic, visible break. It's more like a gradual withdrawal. They start building emotional walls they never needed before. The person who was always available to everyone suddenly becomes distant, reserved, cautious. This inner exile is a form of protection, but also a form of emotional death. They close themselves off not only to those who hurt them, but to the entire world. They develop a shell that protects them, but also isolates them even more deeply. It's as if they decided that if the world can't value their sensitivity, then the world doesn't deserve access to it. The withdrawal is often misinterpreted by others as coldness or arrogance. In reality, it's self-preservation. They learned that their emotional openness is seen as weakness, so they decide to become invulnerable. But this invulnerability has a price. It cuts their connection not only to pain, but also to joy, not only to others, but also to themselves. In this state of inner exile, they can become temporarily cruel, not by nature, but in self-defense. They use their heightened perception, which they once used to heal, now to hurt. They know exactly where others' insecurities are, their deepest wounds, and can use this knowledge as a weapon when they feel attacked. This phase is particularly painful because it goes against everything they believe themselves to be. They feel like a stranger inside their own skin. The person who was always a source of compassion finds themselves being a source of pain. This creates a deep identity crisis. If they're no longer kind, then who are they? The cynicism that can emerge in this phase is a defense against future disappointments. They learn not to trust, not to expect anything from others, to always assume the worst. It's a way to protect their wounded heart, but also a betrayal of their fundamental nature. They become what they always despised, someone who looks at the world through dark lenses. But perhaps the saddest aspect of this inner exile is the loss of innocence. They lose the ability to see good in people automatically. Each new person they meet is viewed with suspicion. Each kind gesture is analyzed for hidden motives. They become hypervigilant not only emotionally, but defensively. This transformation creates an even deeper loneliness. Now they're isolated not only because others don't understand them, but because they chose to isolate themselves. They built their own emotional prison and threw away the key. And inside this prison, they feel safe, but also completely alone. In inner exile, they often feel they've lost an essential part of themselves. They remember how they used to be, open, trusting, full of hope in others. Now, looking back, that person seems naive, almost foolish. But they also seem more alive, more authentic, more connected to the world. But within this apparent darkness, something profound can begin to emerge. Forced solitude, while painful, creates a unique space for self-knowledge. When all external voices are silenced, when all others' demands are cut off, there's finally space to hear their own inner voice. Carl Jung spoke about the need to face our own shadow, the parts of ourselves we prefer to ignore or deny. For someone who spent their life focusing on others, solitude becomes an opportunity to finally look within. They discover aspects of their personality that were hidden under layers of concern for others. In this inner journey, they may discover that their compulsion to heal others sometimes came not only from genuine compassion, but also from a need to feel needed, valued, important. They realize that, in a certain way, they were also using their sensitivity to connect with people, even if unconsciously. This revelation can be initially devastating. They always saw themselves as altruistic, selfless, focused only on others' well-being. Discovering there were elements of personal need in their goodness can seem like a betrayal of everything they believed about themselves, but it's also liberating. It means they can choose when and how to use their sensitivity. Forced solitude also reveals how much of their identity was based on their relationship with others. Without anyone to heal, understand, or help, who are they? This fundamental question forces them to explore aspects of their personality that have nothing to do with their emotional sensitivity. They may discover interests they had neglected, talents they had ignored, dreams they had sacrificed in favor of others' needs. Solitude becomes a laboratory of self-discovery, a sacred space where they can explore who they are when not defined by their relationship with others. The silence that once seemed oppressive begins to reveal itself as a blessing. Without the constant emotional noise of others, they can finally hear their own thoughts, feel their own genuine emotions, connect with their own desires and fears. It's like cleaning your ears after an explosion. Sounds gradually return, but now they're clearer. This reconnection with themselves isn't easy or quick. They spent so much time absorbing others' emotions that they lost touch with their own. They need to relearn the difference between what they genuinely feel and what they absorbed from the environment. It's a delicate process of emotional rediscovery. But when this reconnection happens, something powerful emerges. They discover that their sensitivity doesn't need to be a constant source of pain. It can be a tool of discernment. They learn to use their heightened perception not to lose themselves in others, but to navigate the world better. As they reconnect with themselves, something surprising happens to their perception of the world. The same sensitivity that once overwhelmed them with pain and confusion now becomes a source of clarity and power. The lonely empath continues to see through social masks, but now this doesn't disturb them. It strengthens them. Their ability to perceive lies, hidden intentions, and disguised emotions transforms from burden to strategic advantage. They're no longer fooled by pretty words or calculated gestures. Their intuition, refined by years of absorbing emotional information, becomes a precise radar for detecting authenticity and falsehood. The solitary person discovers they can see social patterns that others don't perceive. They understand power dynamics in groups, detect secret alliances, anticipate conflicts before they explode. Their hypersensitivity, when filtered through wisdom acquired in solitude, becomes almost a social superpower. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of this transformation is how they learn to use their perception selectively. They no longer need to absorb all the emotions around them. They can choose when to open up and when to protect themselves. It's like learning to use a gift that once controlled them. This ability to see clearly, without being emotionally affected by everything they see, can be disturbing to others. They no longer react as expected. They don't let themselves be manipulated by false tears or superficial charm. Their resistance to common emotional tactics makes them unpredictable and, in a way, dangerous to those who depended on manipulation. People begin to realize they can no longer read them like before. They keep their cards close to their chest, reveal only what they choose to reveal. Their new ability to hide their own emotions while perfectly reading others creates a power imbalance that can be intimidating. They also develop an impressive tolerance for being alone. They no longer need constant validation from others or the feeling of being needed. This emotional independence is liberating, but can also be frightening for those around them who are accustomed to their constant emotional availability. Their new strength comes not from hardness or insensitivity, but from clarity and conscious choice. They still feel deeply, still perceive everything, but now have the power to decide how to respond. They're no longer hostage to their own sensitivity. They're its master. This transformation can create even more isolation temporarily. They changed, but the world around them remains the same. People who once sought them out to drain their energy feel blocked. Those who depended on their infinite emotional availability are frustrated with their new boundaries. But gradually, a different type of person begins to approach. Individuals who value authenticity over availability, depth over convenience, quality over quantity in relationships. They discover that their new selectivity attracts more genuine and mutually beneficial connections. The power that emerges from solitude isn't power over others, but power over themselves. They don't use their perception to control or manipulate, but to protect and discern. Their strength comes from self-possession, not domination. And this strength, born from vulnerability and forged in solitude, is practically unshakable. There's a paradoxical truth about the empath's destiny. The more they accept their essential loneliness, the less alone they feel. Not because they find more people, but because they find peace with themselves. They stop seeking in others what they can only find within themselves. The mature empath understands that their sensitivity isn't a defect to be corrected, but a characteristic to be honored. They no longer need to explain or apologize for seeing the world differently. Their heightened perception isn't a burden. It's a rare gift in a world that desperately needs more awareness and genuine compassion. They learn that not everyone is ready for the level of depth they offer, and this isn't a reflection of their value. Some people live on the surface by choice, not inability. They no longer need to try to bring them to the depths. They can simply accept that each person has their own rhythm and journey. Solitude, which once seemed like punishment for being different, reveals itself as a sacred space of authenticity. It's the place where they can exist without masks, without needing to diminish their intensity or explain their sensitivity. In solitude, they're completely free to be exactly who they are. The burden of heightened perception transforms into wisdom when they learn they don't need to carry all the pain they see. They can witness others' suffering with compassion without absorbing it as if it were their own. They can offer understanding without losing themselves in others' experiences. This evolution doesn't mean they become cold or indifferent. On the contrary, their compassion becomes purer because it's not mixed with their own need to be needed. They love and help because they choose to, not because they're compelled by emotional compulsion. The empath discovers that their greatest contribution to the world doesn't come from sacrificing themselves for others, but from keeping the flame of genuine sensitivity alive in a world that often values hardness over tenderness. They become a guardian of emotional depth, a reminder that feeling deeply isn't weakness, but courage. Their final solitude isn't empty. It's full of self-knowledge, inner peace, deep connection with themselves. They carry a special quality of presence that can be felt by others, even when few can name it. It's the presence of someone who knows themselves completely and isn't afraid of their own depth. And perhaps most importantly, the empath learns that their solitude isn't absence of love. It's excess of truth. They see too much, feel too much, understand too much to be content with the comfortable illusions that sustain many superficial relationships. Their solitude is the price they pay for their emotional integrity. In the end, they discover they weren't looking for people. They were looking for home. And home, they finally understand, isn't a place or a person. It's a state of being where they can exist authentically, where their sensitivity is honored, where their depth is valued. And this place, ironically, they find first within themselves, in the sacred quietude of their own solitude. The journey of those who possess this extreme sensitivity isn't for the faint of heart. It's an initiation into the depth of human experience that few would voluntarily choose. But for those who live it, it offers something precious: the possibility of radical authenticity and deep understanding of human nature. If you recognized yourself in these words, know that your loneliness isn't weakness. It's proof of rare consciousness. You're not alone in your experience of being alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, your ability to see what others ignore is exactly what the world needs, even if it doesn't know it yet. If this content resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel for more explorations of human nature, and leave a like so we can reach other people who need to know they're not alone in their unique journey.